Uncle Doug.
Hello.
An event has just occurred that happens twice yearly.
A seismic world-changing event.
It changes my world every time it happens because traffic downtown in Salt Lake City becomes annoying just for a couple days.
Except not this time.
Yeah,
not this time. That's true. That's
nobody was there.
But Uncle Mark, you wanted to talk a little bit about this.
Well, as far as events that change the world go, yeah, for sure. I'd like to discuss that. And just a week ago, as of this recording, was of course LDS General Conference here in Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. And if you're confused by what I just said, that is spelled CONTFRNSE. And it is the semi-annual barn burner of excitement, doctrine, slightly confused old men, long, very silent pauses, and a backdrop that non-Mormons always mistake for a funeral. So I think it was like the 219th or, I don't know, 190th or something. Who gives a shit? Doesn't matter.
Who gives a shit?
And speaking of non-Mormons, more than a few listeners have asked me, what in the hell is the deal with how the old men in question speak, particularly at conference? Now, as Mormons, we're incredibly used to that, right? We've kind of just taken it for granted that is what holiness sounds like.
That's what good oration sounds like, yeah.
Exactly. So I think I want to try to help our listeners understand this a little bit. And there's kind of two conversations to have here about conference. One is style and one is substance. And as I've said, more than a few Never Mormon listeners have asked what the fuck is up with the somnambulist intonations of conference talks after they've seen clips on YouTube. So let's start with the style conversation, if there is such a thing.
Right.
There is actually an extremely common hypnosis technique called either the voice roll or simply the hypnotic voice. And it's really pretty simple. You just slow your speech way down, become very monotone, and avoid complicated subjects that require intense concentration on the part of the listener. And then their breathing patterns unconsciously start to mimic that of the speaker. And then, if you can...
Why aren't we using this for our patron section?
I think we are.
Pressing 0. Now, if you can precede or underscore all of that calming talk with even more calming, monotonous music, that gets the whole room into the same slow, relaxed breathing pattern. Their heads are like little plastic sacrament cups you can just go ahead and fill up with anything you like. That's my theorem anyway, but I watched a bunch of YouTube videos from hypnotists, and the way they describe, working with their patients and the hypnotic voice is exactly what
that doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, here's a question. Do you think, and maybe you're going to get to this, but do you think that this is
conscious?
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know.
I think to get to that level of the Mormon Church, you have to perfect that voice. But I wonder if somebody somewhere is like, "Here's what we're going to do," but I don't know. I don't know either.
No, I don't know if it's just a culture that has developed. Mormonism has all these strange little kind of cultural idiosyncrasies that are all its own.
Right.
And I don't know if this is just what, again, like we were saying earlier, if what you think holiness sounds like when you're enculturated in the Mormon Church, or if at some point, because I'm going to demonstrate a little bit of an evolution here in how the conference talks worked, or if at some point, they said, oh, it's more effective if we kind of slow it down a little bit and have help people relax into it. So
maybe there was a kind of natural selection that happened here.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about literally the most boring group of humans on the earth.
Oh my God, yes.
I think it's totally believable that they just came to this quite naturally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so too. I don't think Mormonism has a lot of sinister kind of elements to it, but I don't think they're sinister in that way.
I don't think they're that. Yeah, I agree. I don't think they're that purposefully sinister.
Yeah, because what they're saying in conference is public. It's not like they're using a hypnotic technique to plant an idea, right?
Yeah.
To plant such a subversive idea that they would hide it from the cameras.
But I will say this: it is boring enough that I'm pretty sure my heart has stopped entirely while I've been watching it at various moments.
Yeah, well, as we'll discuss and as we'll listen to some of these guys say, it is, listeners they will think in this segment that the podcast has stopped.
Yeah.
And it hasn't. So you just got to bear with some of these clips I'm going to play because there are some long pauses.
Let's get to it. I'm
to
excited.
it. I think for Mormon listeners that cadence that we're about to experience is so ubiquitous in Mormon hierarchy that it's triggering.
Yeah, that's true. This is a trigger warning.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult for me to listen to, actually. I find it it correlates to a lot of trauma in my life. So you're welcome, dear listeners. We'll suffer through this together.
Let me make one connection before you dive in, just because I think it adds some color, which is ironic because it's coming from Mike Pence. There
is a color there. It's just white.
I found his performance at the debate the other day to be very, very reminiscent of and it's because they come from similar backgrounds, right? Like he is a hyper-religious guy, but I found the way he would talk in that unctuous, slow, monotone way very, very much like what we're about to experience now.
Yeah, it's true.
Plus, he had the good element of obvious anti-woman sort of nonsense. So, like patriarchal patronizingness. Is that a word? I made that up.
Style and substance were very similar to what Mormon Conference talks are. So
right.
So here is a former prophet named George Albert Smith. I think he was the last prophet to have a beard, you guys.
What?
He had kind of a Van Dyke. He was kind of a smart Van Dyke with glasses. Yeah,
he looks very much like Lenin.
He does look a lot like Lenin. So here he is in 1941. This was the earliest recorded conference I can find, and I think you'll find this interesting. Here he's talking about how a Catholic man wrote to him to have the Tabernacle Choir sing a particular song when he was going to have his leg amputated. Oh. So, yeah, this is a very strange story.
That man in his room was absorbing something that the result of which was that the next morning, when the doctor came to take him into the operating room and examined him, he said, "Why, there's no necessity to take you into the operating room. Man, your leg's getting along all right. We'll not take it off." And this good Catholic wrote to me and he says, "I wonder if other people would think what I think. I wonder if they'd believe that I was healed by hearing the songs that the Lord loves to hear, songs of praise." And so I want to say to this Tabernacle Choir, that's only one of the many blessings that you could trace if we only had time to trace them.
So the reason I played that is because it is not what conference talks sound like now.
No, it was lively and engaging. A complete bullshit story, but
still plenty of long pauses. And I think, one of my new theories about this about this phenomenon is that it's just because these guys aren't born they're not natural speakers. They got to this position not because of their, great charisma. The charismatic leader is long dead. They got here because, whatever internal politics happened, and that doesn't necessarily set you up to be a great public speaker. So
no, except by the time you're prophet, you've done a ton of public speaking.
Yeah,
you may not be great, but you've done a lot.
Right, and it's all been firesides and church speeches. So you've polished this, cadence,
this patois,
to a point where not only you're good at that specific thing, but it's also just incredibly and obviously insincere.
Right.
Yeah. But I listened to that clip, Mark, and it sounds like old timey radio Bible hour.
See, I think that is a very classic American kind of preacher. Not like a Pentecostal fire and brimstone, but say like a kind of mainline Baptist church from the same time. And he did have that very interesting flourish that in his voice that sounded more like Burl Ives to me than than anything else. And
Right.
But what I find interesting is that he comes out of a much earlier Mormon culture. I wonder if that was kind of what it's used to sound like.
Sure.
Right, closer to its founding is more very much an American, mainline Protestant kind of sound to it. But let us move on. So just a few years later, less than a decade, 20 years later, things began to take a major turn toward the vanilla, guys. And here's one of our favorites, a young Thomas S. Monson, way before he was prophet, speaking in General Conference.
It's so hard to believe that there was ever a young Thomas Monson.
It's impossible that he was ever young. So this is 1963.
I feel to thank my Heavenly Father for His many blessings to me. I'm grateful to have been born of goodly parents, whose parents were gathered out of the lands of Sweden and Scotland and England by humble missionaries, who through the bearing of their testimonies touched the spirits of these wonderful people. I'm so grateful for my teachers and my leaders in my boyhood and young manhood in a humble pioneer ward and a pioneer stake.
So you can see it's begun to evolve. Right?
Yeah, that sounds much more like what I'm used to.
Yeah.
Literally just trying to drag you. It feels like, you got your foot caught in the stirrup and now your horse is just walking slowly away.
Just sauntering.
That's what I listen to that. It makes me feel like when you're at a red light and it turns green and the car in front of you doesn't go yet.
Yeah.
Just fucking go. Well, it's going to get worse, Doug. You're now going to be stuck behind a senior citizen in Florida at the green light, right? So I'm jumping ahead. There were plenty of examples from the 70s and 80s that were also good, but I thought it would be illustrative to jump ahead in this same man's life, and here he is as prophet, Thomas S. Monson, 44 years later in 2014. See if you can detect a change. Here we go.
Arthur Gordon wrote in a national magazine, and I quote, "When I was around 13 and my brother 10, Father had promised to take us to the circus. But at lunchtime, there was a phone call. Some urgent business required his attention downtown. We braced ourselves for disappointment. Then we heard him say into the phone, 'No, I won't be down. It will have to wait.' When he came back to the table, Mother smiled. 'The circus keeps coming back, she said. 'I know,' said the father, 'but childhood doesn't.'" Close quote.
Sorry, I had to get the close quote in there. So,
Close quote.
Close quote, as though he had written this down contemporaneously.
close quote. So you could hear, it's like take him from 1963 and play him at half speed.
Yeah.
Right.
And
It's kind of what's happening.
Like that pause when he said it required his attention.
Yeah.
Downtown.
Downtown.
Just say downtown. It required his attention downtown. Why is there a fucking pause there? You're killing me.
Yeah, you don't even, there's not even a comma in that moment. Just fucking roll on, baby.
Yeah.
And also, there's just this, I don't know if this is just a Utah culture thing or if it's very specific to Mormons of this age, but he never says his mother, their mother, my mother.
Right.
It's always mother.
Right. Yeah, that's another Mike Pence thing.
And remember, this is a guy who is talking to other adults.
Yeah.
Like, that's the voice you affect when you're talking to a child who's slowly falling asleep.
Exactly.
Right.
As you're waiting for the Benadryl to kick in so you can go have a drink. Okay, so let's have one final one. This is one of the great offenders, as far as I'm concerned, of this particular speech pattern. The incredibly insincere Jeffrey R. Holland from 2016, speaking in conference voice in all its glorious flower.
Oh, boy.
Brothers and sisters, do you have any idea? Do you have any notion or inkling whatsoever of how much we love you. For 10 hours, you watch, fixed on one face at this pulpit sequentially. But for those same 10 hours, those of us seated behind this pulpit are fixed on you. You thrill us to the center of our soul. Whether that's the 21,000 here in the conference center, or multitudes in meeting houses and chapels, or finally millions around the globe in homes in some distant location, maybe huddled around a family computer screen. There you are. Here you are. Hour after hour. In your Sunday best. Being your best.
Uncle Mark, you didn't have to play the whole 10 hours.
Mormonism, above all else, is a test of endurance.
Oh, my God. And when he says 10 hours, you guys, there's 10 hours of that shit.
Yeah. There's 10 hours of that shit, and then a lot of people have, like, meetings to talk about it afterwards.
Yeah.
Like family meetings and community meetings. So.
And it speaks to the style, if whatever you want to call it, that when he was at the beginning, when he was like, "Do you have any idea?" Like, I'm like, that was kind of menacing.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not sure where he's going with this, but he's like cracking peanuts while his thugs stand behind him. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's again, it's literally very difficult for me to listen to that because of that bizarre intonality and the extremely insincere delivery. And this particular guy, Jeffrey Holland, is famous for cracking, or just about crying at just the right moment.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You could hear it in that clip you played.
Yeah.
It's very clear that on the teleprompter it says, "Pause to cry."
Yeah,
I'm
it's so
very
performative
emotional right now.
Yeah, it's so performative, and and so self-evidently insincere and rehearsed.
Yeah,
that it's.
I don't know why you guys keep saying it's insincere. He said he loves me.
That he's been staring back at you in your Sunday best.
I know. Again, like
being your best.
My eyes have been fixed upon you for a long time.
It's very spooky.
It is. That's why I'm saying mine is like just a perfect match for your guys' segment. So
yeah.
So that's kind of stylistically how Mormonism has somehow arrived at this. But I think then there's also the substance issue of what conference is, and Mormon leaders use the semi-annual conference to make tiny tweaks at best to the massive machinery of Mormon doctrine and practice. Usually their talks consist of doubling or tripling down on already problematic or odious policies that they've had in place for decades, things that generally are extremely brutalizing or cruel to women in the church, to non-white people, to the LGBT community in the church,
right.
and outside of it. So, this is kind of just stylistically alone, it's pretty nauseating in my opinion. But if you listen to, if you can wade through the incredible boredom, there are sometimes these moments of there's very occasionally news made, right?
Right.
They very occasionally tweak something. Like this is how slowly Mormonism, the ship of Mormonism, can be turned. When they went to 2-hour church, that was insane.
It was a seismic event.
Yeah, it's true.
Seismic
I
event.
do have to say, Uncle Mark, that while you kind of glossed over the fact that yes, a lot of their stuff, sure, it's anti-LGBTQ, it's horribly racist or whatever. At least they, as you've heard in some of these clips, at least they have really interesting, totally made up stories to
Yeah.
illustrate their points.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just talked about that recently, didn't we? What were we talking about? Oh, I think it was in the Go Ask Alice segment.
Yeah.
We were talking about how Mormon leadership they'll just have the most perfectly crafted anecdote for the moment, without anybody's names, without any specifics,
Right.
No attribution. They would fail a freshman writing class because they had no bibliography, right?
Exactly.
Well, and because it's so clearly fake. Like
Yeah.
it's not even thinly veiled as true. They just claim it's true. But there was one just this year, just this last conference last week, where a woman. This was in the women's meeting. They don't allow the women to talk.
That's right. That's
real-
right, everybody. The ladies get their own meeting for
Yeah.
men to talk to them.
Right. And then they also have to sit through all the other bullshit. But this was in the women's meeting, and a woman told a story weepingly about a woman that she says, quote, "I'll call her Mary."
To protect the identity of the innocent.
Right, yeah, exactly. No, obviously you made her up, and you're telling a story about how coffee ruined her life. What the fuck is the matter with
Not
you?
only did coffee ruin her life, it ruined generations.
Yeah.
Right, because great grandma or whoever, Mary, had a coffee pot on the stove. She was like a farm woman, right?
Yeah.
And she had a coffee pot on the stove, and she just occasionally enjoyed a cup of coffee. Well, that has separated generations of her family from eternal glory.
The stupidest thing.
And she cried, and she
did.
cried.
Which they all do. That's another big Mormon thing.
Yeah,
Men in wards, and just in a regular sort of parish church sized congregation, men who have never cried, who have never shown a single emotion other than anger to their own children, will openly weep in front of a group of their fellow church members.
yeah, and their children, to whom they have been generally angry or indifferent at best,
Right.
have to sit there in the pews among their friends and gape in horror at seeing their father cry.
Yeah.
And I think it's good. I cry all the time. Men should cry.
Yes.
They should just do it more often than in front of everybody in the neighborhood twice a year.
Right,
yeah,
right.
And because they quote unquote felt the spirit when they were at the camping trip that they took their family on or whatever. It's always so made up and so put on. And
Yeah. And it's almost a right. Like you can't advance. It's almost a sign of power
yeah,
that how easily you will cry as you tell the story you've practiced 50 fucking times.
it's how spiritual you are.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
What's weird to me, though, guys, is that that's all true. But with how little the church actually changes policies, why do they do this twice a year?
well, I think that's exactly. I was just thinking about that. I agree. They shouldn't, because they don't make changes to anything significant except when they make huge fucking PR mistakes.
Right.
But
Which is pretty frequent. Which is
mostly
more than twice a year.
Yeah, exactly. But remember when they moved church to 2 hours, or they got rid of the term Maya maids. Like Mormons are expecting to find out we're being called to Kirtland, Ohio, or something like that. Like this is it. The second coming's coming, and every year they're disappointed. So mostly the speeches are about nothing.
Yeah.
I honestly think that you hit the nail on the head at the beginning, Mark. They're just renewing the hypnosis.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's like the conference is like a communist newspaper. It's it may be 20 pages long, but there's no fucking news in it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Nothing changes, but they just have to go through these motions and kind of keep the machine moving, because if they say we're going to conference once a year, well, it means they were wrong to have done it twice a year. Right? So they can just never do that. So that's kind of conference, guys.
Yeah.
It's
torture.
torturous. It's so insanely boring.
Yeah, I've told the story before on I think this show, where when I was sitting in for you, Dan, on Thank God I'm Atheist a couple years ago or whatever, Frank wanted to do a conference wrap up, and so I went to YouTube and I'm like, oh fuck, okay, I can do this, and put on vomit-proof clothes and sat on the floor, and And I watched 3 fucking hours of conference before I realized it was the wrong year. I have never been more angry in my life. So I had to start over. So anyway, it's just excruciating. If I advise against ever participating in it beyond this segment of our show.
It's a good reason to not be a Mormon, you guys.
One of many. So
One of many.
In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen.